Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
It's really nice to have you here. Thank you so much for making the time. As you know, Matriark is focused on promoting well-being and wealth to women. We're going to touch on a lot of subjects. We're going to do a quick 360 with you, and then we're going to delve into more like your background, and then talk a little bit about your work, and then we're going to finally talk about money. Are you ready?
Yeah, I think so. As ready as I'll ever be.
All right. So, what's your definition of well-being?
That's a wonderful question. I think it's about balance between inner and outer selves. I think that well-being can exist without an understanding of both, which is something that I've probably taken a long time to realize. I think I've always honored my mind over my body, but especially when
Mm,
it comes to art, the bodily sensation, the feeling of centeredness that art can bring you is one that engages both body and mind. So I think ensuring those two are aligned, that's well-being.
And so, can you share a little bit of your personal background and how you became who you are? Do you have siblings? How is your family? Where do you live now? You're in the East Coast, it seems.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
exactly. I grew up on the Upper East Side in Manhattan. New York is a essential piece of who I am. I have two siblings, an older brother and a younger sister. Another, being the middle child is certainly a an archetype that I feel like I fully embody. Maybe a little bit more independent, and my parents would hate to hear me say ignored, but not ignored, but having things together and being not needing the attention, I think, is
Right.
probably the not ignored but not demanding attention. And I honestly love being the middle child. I think that it's taught me a
Mm,
lot of great life skills.
yeah, I'd
But
say negotiating your way, I think. No?
exactly, exactly. And I'm married to a middle child, so I think that is not a mistake. um, and a friend of mine once told me, being a middle child, it's like you seek your family elsewhere. And that's not to say that my family isn't my family, because I do adore my siblings and my parents, but that you're much more willing to find relationships that fulfill you that aren't as close to home. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel that very, very, very strong relationships with a small group of friends. So yes, yeah, and grew up in New York. Was there for a very long time. I live in Connecticut now. My husband's a professor, so we're always, being a professor is a wonderful job where you're, yes, on campus for 9 months of the year, but you also get to travel. And he
Mm-hmm.
studies history, so we're often wherever his research takes us. And my job is very flexible, so I can do that as well, and that is yeah, change and constant sort of flux is actually something that I find very stimulating. And of course,
Yes.
art is everywhere. That's a human constant, so I find it,
Mm.
whether we're in Connecticut or in Europe or in New York or wherever, it's always something that is waiting to be discovered.
Fantastic. And have you always loved art, or when did you start loving art? How did that happen for you?
Yeah, I think New York City is a probably great place to start to answer that question, because
Mhm.
I think I took art as a given for most of my life up until college. New York City, especially the Upper East Side, is, I mean, chock full of museums. Fifth Avenue having, five of the greatest institutions in the United States, if not the world, is not the norm. And yet it was my norm. We would go to the Met on Fridays and explore a different set of galleries. I think that because it was so embedded in the life of the city, I didn't think that it was something special, that it was something that set me apart from anyone. Everyone valued this thing, but in college it became very clear. A friend of mine came over for one of our breaks, and she looked around and noted how unusual it was that we had art on our walls. And that was a moment where I realized that not everyone has art on their walls, and that's
Mhm.
not something that people seek out. So I think that, yeah, our art has always been integrated into who I am. Funnily, more from my mother's side. I mean, only funnily because my family on my father's side has been involved in the arts in New York for a very long time, but my mother is the one who is the personal connection that I have to art. She was also an
Mhm.
art history major and is the person who has put art on our walls
Makes
growing
total
up.
sense.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, speaking of your family, you come from larger than life family.
Mhm.
How was it growing up with this larger than life name, and how did that influence you and you carving out a space in the world for
Yeah,
yourself?
absolutely. I think that that's been the sort of central question of my life in many
Mhm,
ways, and I think it's a central question of most people's lives, how who are you as an individual, and how is that different from your context? How much do you owe your context who you are? I'm a sixth generation member of the Rockefeller family. My great-grandfather was Nelson Rockefeller, who was the governor of New York State and the vice president under Gerald Ford, and a big art collector himself. And that's probably the person that people would most recognize. But my family is who I am in so many ways. I think that it is the thing that gives me context in the world. It makes me feel centered. And because I know that I have a relationship with so many people and I understand myself both sort of horizontally within the context of all these other people. And, my family is, 200 more plus people who are who I know. I know all my cousins. I know my third cousin. I know my third cousin once removed. It's something that a lot of people can't say. So I feel
mm,
very centered in that, as
mm,
well as, throughout time. I understand the history and the values that are very, very strong and have been handed down very specifically. Values of, giving back, values of the importance of art, and also an understanding of how the world's systems work and how change can happen within those systems, I think has been
mhm,
consistent in my family's history, whether in setting up philanthropic endeavors or creating solutions. So yes, I really can't separate myself from
mhm,
what
of
that
course.
is. But of course, I'm very interested in the future and pushing forward.
And then you started the company Less Than Half not
Mhm.
long ago, and I'm going to read this because I don't want to botch it, because the
Yeah,
title Less Than Half comes from a 1989 poster by the Guerrilla Girls, very famous. And the quote says, "You are seeing less than half the picture without the vision of women artists and artists of color," which is a very powerful statement and that's so
exactly.
true. So, why don't you tell us a little bit of your mission and how that inspired your creation of this company?
Yeah. I think that we don't realize, and what's so great about that poster, and which I can see hanging in my office right here, is that not only does it have that statement, but most of the poster is a blank space, and that sort of physicalizes the lack. The unfortunate thing about lack is that it's really hard to see, and it's something that it takes a long time to even recognize exists. When, you're defined by negative space, how do you visualize that negative space? So it was in college that I started really only writing about women artists, recognizing how little scholarship there was, and that just kept going from there. And I was
Mm-hmm.
writing about women when I graduated from my master's program, and eventually realized that the numbers that we see, the representation we see in the art market, 3% of the art market is work by women artists, 15% of museum collections in the United States are works by women artists. Seeing those numbers, necessitates change. You can't look at those numbers and not want them to change. But as having a little bit of a sort of entrepreneurial and business brain, I always, you have to think what is the most effective way of going about change? And to me, it was clear that the collectors were the sort of linchpin between, if you can get collectors to start collecting the work of women artists, specifically women collectors, then you can really change. You can really move the needle. So that's our mission, is to get more women into the art market as collectors and supporters of women artists. And we do that through membership, which is tiered membership that is suited to various people along that art collecting journey, whether they're brand new to it and want to learn how the art market actually functions,
Mm-hmm.
the sort of brass tacks of buying art, negotiating for art, or what's art law, all of that, to the sort of more philosophical approach. How do we bridge the gap for a lot of these women artists to get them to a point where they have a legacy, where they are in the art history books? Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
membership
it's a
is
long journey.
Yeah.
from beginning to end. And what do you think was the biggest barrier for women artists to get through today? Other than, obviously, you alluded to the fact that there is the gatekeepers in that sense, and there's also the people that purchase, which are the collectors. But
Yeah.
what's the barrier to even get in front of them?
Yeah, I think that this idea about accessibility, of course, to be able to sell your work, you have to make it and then get it to market. And I think that if you look at the types of artists, women artists who are successful, you
Hmm.
see it concentrated at the very young,
Hmm.
in artists in their 20s and 30s, and the very, very old artists in their late 80s and 90s.
Hmm.
And there's this very long fallow period. And I think that that has something to do with the caretaking responsibilities of women. There's a long period of time where women are taken out of the art market because they're taking care of children or elderly parents, and they are either not making art or making art in a very different context, a very different subject matter, or even very different mediums. I think, oil painting when you have a newborn baby is not exactly healthy for baby or mother. So the change in that
Hmm.
is certainly a factor. And, that is to say that if you even are making art. So I won't fully put it and say the reason is motherhood or caretaking, because of course not all artists are saddled with that. But it is interesting to see that the the market does seem to lose interest with women when they are in that period, in their
I
40s and
find this
50s.
fascinating you say this because in other industries that I have experience with, in a way, there's the same issue. And yes, for all of those reasons you mentioned, obviously there's a culture of youth and everything that's young, it's fresh,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
from the eyes of others, not from the eyes of the artist, but from the collectors, the buyers, the consumers. I feel sometimes, yes, there is the freshness of youth. And then there is the wisdom of the old.
Mhm.
And right in between, women just disappear.
Yeah,
We middle aged women are basically now it's changing with all these menopause,
right,
movement and all those
companies
things.
and
But
yeah,
it's even still, though, we are somehow invisible in between for
yeah.
those reasons you talked about, but also even because physically we change, and obviously there is a standard for all what's sexy, what's not sexy and attractive.
Mhm.
So I think all of those combinations, like societal pressures on aging women, I think it's
I think you're
very
absolutely
tough
right.
for everybody doing anything. I mean, I guess all of those factors, I'm sure, have an impact. And
Yeah.
so then you've been doing this work. Can you share a little bit, maybe the particular good positive impact that you saw firsthand with your company, if you want to give us some examples of what you've been doing?
Yeah, absolutely. We have definitely seen some really, heartening, stories, or heard heartening stories. I'll give one that just happened last month. So every month we have a open matrons mixer. So the matrons of the arts is what we call our membership group. And we have an open matrons mixer where anyone curious about how the company functions or has questions can show up in an art gallery that is less than half approved, so a gallery that shows 50% or more women artists. And the mixer will always be at one of those galleries while they're showing a woman artist. So we bring women together at an institution that values women, to see the work of a woman artist, and it's this wonderful confluence of good supportive energy. And at a mixer last month, we had one of our matrons, who a member of the group, who met an artist who invited our matron member to her studio. Matron goes to the studio, loves the work, and purchases a work. And I think that that is just a perfect encapsulation of what we're trying to do and what we indeed are doing.
Yes.
It's a very human thing. That was a interaction that happened organically and in person and was mutually beneficial. The matron had never done a studio visit before, wasn't sort of fully aware of the systems of buying art beyond buying art from a gallery or from an auction
Mhm.
house. So she got exposed to that. She got an amazing experience of interacting with this artist. The artist made a sale, made another fan, and it's those types of things that you can't engineer those. You just bring the right people into a room and wonderful things happen. And it's every time we have a matrons mixer, there is some, the one we had last week in LA. The next day I run into two people who had attended who didn't know each other before the mixer, but now we're hanging out
Mm.
together and, seeing art together. So that's the energy we want. That's the impact we want. And it starts with those two people, but it ripples outwards.
Yes, it's exciting when these things happen, and so much depends on also the organizer, which is you, to really understand both sides, both the needs from both sides, and be the perfect matchmaker,
Right.
and
Matchmaker is
having that
exactly right.
sensibility. I think that that's fantastic that you have that.
Absolutely.
Um, so I love that name, the matrons, in the matronage movement. When we are matriarch with the matronage, I think it's all super
E
fantastic.
exactly, it really does, yeah, they echo each other.
And on your website, I'm going to read again so I don't watch it again, but you mentioned the story of Romaine Brooks.
Mhm,
She was a symbolist painter
mhm.
whose work was hidden in basements all over museums. And so, obviously, this happens to many women artists. She's just one example. So, if you could rewrite art history, what artists that have been overlooked, in your opinion, should be placed in the big canons with the greats?
Absolutely. Well, first, I would go way, 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 way back and say we need to start acknowledging the cave women who were most likely responsible for, a lot of the cave drawings that we see. We have so many, so many cartoons and references to cavemen and the cave women. There have been studies that have shown that it's likely that cave women were responsible for a lot of the cave drawings. So I
Never
think that
thought of that.
yeah, I mean, it truly just sums up the problem. It's like we have this assumption that the maker, the active party, is male, and how do we, with so little evidence to suggest that? But the neutral is always male. When you say, "Oh, my doctor said this," and you say, "Oh, he said what?" and then you say, "Actually, my doctor's a woman." I mean, how many times have we had? I do that all the time. How many times have we done that? So um,
Yes,
I would start with the cave women, and then,
good one.
at every juncture in art history, there's always a woman making something in a similar vein. I mean, how could you be a human being with an impulse towards making art in a milieu that is, specific milieu, and not be moved to make in one way or another?
Mhm.
All
And in
too
terms
common.
of the artists now, the contemporary artists today, that you think the future generations are going to be studying, or they're going to be looking back like with great awe?
Yeah.
Do you have any names?
Yeah, maybe because she's been on my mind recently. Unfortunately, she died just 2 years ago. But the
Mm.
painter Juanita McNeely was a feminist painter up until very recently, but very much in the 70s, whose life was very much defined by pain and difficulty. She had a painful abortion in the 1960s. She was wheelchair bound for most of her life. She was a painter throughout of very large scale works, and she paints extremely viscerally about the female body, but also, back to that well-being, the psychological torture, as well as the physical discomfort and pain of her specific experience, but also sort of a female experience. And I think about her work all the time. I think it's
Mhm.
searing. I mean, people use that word a lot, but searing and vital, and just
Mhm.
images that we don't see that often.
Mhm.
So
Fantastic.
I think she'll be steady.
Good one. And if you curate an exhibition with no rules, no budget constraints, total creative freedom, what kind of theme would it be, or angle, or what would you do?
That's a great question. A lot of my interest comes down to these almost like the women artists in footnotes and in between parentheses, the women who are, working just as tirelessly alongside the men that are now sort of defining the canon. And I would focus on that, the sort of a mirror or parallel experience, a parallel art history that is very much the same story that we know. And I would also do that in, I would very much, include the perspectives of not just the wife of the man who was at the center, but think about the different pockets. Like if you think about New York City in the 1940s, abstract expressionism is sort of the main artistic movement. But, what was happening elsewhere? What was happening in Brooklyn? What was happening in Harlem? What was happening at, concurrent moments? And how do we ensure that one story isn't sort of the so big that it's overshadowing all the other ones?
And if someone listening today, like on the other side, wanted to start collecting art done by women, where should they begin? Obviously, they can join
Right.
your
Yeah, that's
company,
definitely my first response.
of course,
Yeah.
which actually is fantastic because you already have the relationships and you have. I think what's really great about your company is there's also an educational piece of it that is very helpful for collectors. So, but other than your company, is there any way, because obviously those things are really in person, you have to go
Mhm.
in physically. So if somebody lives across the world and wants to do this, what should they do?
To start to collect, I like to tell people that, you're already a curator, you already have taste, you already have a perspective, and to start paying attention to your own life, your own aesthetic choices, your own things that you're drawn to. Maybe, you're always wearing uh knits and textiles, and maybe that means that you should start exploring a little bit of textile based art, or, in terms of finding what your taste is, you're probably already telegraphing things that you don't really realize you're doing, and that can sort of translate into your interests in art. But many people will say you have to see as much as you can, try to expose yourself to art, go to local museums and that sort of thing. So often you'll find an open studio sort of weekend or day in your area. It's very easy just to Google open studio and then whatever your location is. And there'll be a weekend where artists will open up their studios to the general public, and you can get a sense of a lot of art in a short period of time. So I would definitely start there, build relationships personally with artists, and yeah, see as much as you can. And then also I want to remind people that prices for art are generally thought of as prohibitive. We get a lot of headlines about, $100 million pieces of art, which is absolutely absurd. But the vast majority of artists are selling at prices that are affordable, that will
Mm.
not make your jaw drop. So remember that most artists are working artists. Most artists are selling at a price point that will help them pay their rent and not, finance a penthouse in New York or whatever it is that the artists who are selling for tens of millions of dollars are doing.
Do you find that a lot of the collectors that come to you, they are doing this as an investment or they're just buying because they're just art lovers? What's your take? Because I have
Yeah,
my own opinion of both, but
right. No, I think that people try their darndest to commodify it and sort of make it into a financial vehicle, but it does not operate like any other market. So you have to buy what you love because there is no guarantee of return. So but of course we do live in a world where that's very much a part of the conversation. So it would be silly not to pretend it doesn't exist. And I
right.
will say that women artists historically have been written out of the conversation and are slowly making their way back in. So I would say, as a category, women artists are a great investment. Women
Mm.
artists are recognized at a fraction of their true value. And I don't think there's a problem in investing in the work of a woman artist because,
Mm.
first, because you love the thing. but
Yes.
second, because you recognize that the cultural value of this thing is not lining up with the monetary value. And that is very clear. And it's just something that more and more people are going to recognize. And if you recognize it before people, then congratulations. You've understood
Right.
the meaning behind the work
Hmm.
before
Right.
other people have been enlightened.
What is, in your opinion, the biggest faux pas that
Mm,
a collector can do when
right.
they're trying to either buy art, approach artists, whichever?
Yeah. I think that okay, there are probably several. I
Good. Okay, you can
wouldn't
list them.
even if you're looking for something above your couch, I would say don't mention that that's what you're trying to do. I think that, yeah, getting something to match your couch is definitely a faux pas. Um, I would say negotiating too aggressively in the first interactions you have with an artist or a gallery. Negotiating on price is definitely something that occurs in the art world. Getting
Mm,
discounts is definitely something that happens. But as I said, and as I will say again and again and again, the art world is relationships based business. And if you come out of the gate with undercutting a price, that will become your reputation. So understanding that reputation is paramount, and you don't want to become a person who is known to undervalue the work that is being done,
right.
especially if it's a artist that is living. You negotiating on a price is you taking away from that artist's income.
So let's talk a little bit about the future of Less Than Half. I mean, obviously, you've
Mm-hmm.
been, it's a whirlwind in a way because you have to go through the fairs and you're doing a lot of things.
Absolutely.
What's coming up in the pipeline that you're excited about?
We're very excited about developing this Less Than Half Approved program. So it's
Oh,
a network of galleries that are 50% or more showing women artists. And so the idea is to create a network of trusted galleries that are working towards the same goal as the matrons of the arts, and they'll be recommended to the matrons and we'll be very intentional about developing relationships between those galleries and the
mhm.
membership, but also as a sort of indication of or thank you, really acknowledgement of the work that these galleries are doing
Yes.
externally. So we give galleries a decal to put in their window so they can be recognized as that by anyone walking through the door. And I think that there's just a enormous undercurrent of women who are quietly working towards change and aren't being very vocal about it. But
Mhm.
I've learned from being at art fairs and telling people about this program and what we do that there's a real need for it, there's a real desire for it, and that there's already, it's just about taking this energy that already exists and this power that already exists and sort of directing it in a specific way so that we can be greater than the sum of our parts. So
Yeah. And
I'm
everybody
excited
wins
for
with
that.
all of it. It's
Yeah.
like a constant, yeah, I think that that's a fantastic thing to do. And so, one of the most important things for me in terms of how I started Matriark was sort of in a similar vein. It was more from fashion and from the design standpoint, but we
Hmm.
also featured artists where we want to send as much money to the hands of women as possible.
Hmm.
Over the last 5 years, I had a shop in Sag Harbor that now I closed to focus on this and a newsletter. But one of the things that I've learned through the thousands of people that I met and the women that I met is that it's just really difficult to talk about money,
Hmm.
for so many reasons. We don't have financial literacy. We didn't grow up talking about it.
Yeah.
And I find that it's a real big hindrance in for us to do things that matter and that have an impact.
Yeah.
And so I started this podcast to start talking about this, to normalize talking about money
Hmm.
with everybody, with all our guests. Um, I was a little hesitant to approach you on this because you come from a Rockefeller family, and I didn't want to push too much or to go into your private area. But I also think it's important to talk about. This is why women have always fear to talk about money. So I do
Yeah.
appreciate your openness to answer these questions. It's my plan to ask all those questions with all my guests to show also that everybody has a different relationship with money. And
Mhm.
that's okay. No matter what kind of background you have, everybody has a different relationship with money. So my question to you, one of my questions to you is like when you were growing up, was money something that your family discussed openly in the household? And then if you did, what kind of messages did you receive it, like subliminally or not? How was it growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I think I no, it wasn't openly discussed, really. We did get an allowance, and I think that, it started at I remember you get when you're 6 years old, you get a quarter every week, and, start to learn how to save money and, spend it in whatever way, and I think it's interesting to think back and see how a lot of the approaches to money that are very gendered were, adhered to or, enforced in some way. I remember saving my first $100 and how I kept it in a little like box in my dresser, and it was, celebrated and encouraged that, I saved to $100, and then a couple years later, I don't know how old I was. Sometime as a teenager, I had saved $1,000, and to me, it was that that was the accomplishment, the saving,
Right.
and I think that that is very much how women are taught
Yes.
to there is a relationship to money, that it's saving, and money is not a tool necessarily to achieve something that is not about money. I think that men, yes, you can use money to buy something, but you can also use money to invest in yourself, and you can use money to invest in something that will make you more money, and
Right.
saving and, literally putting the in this case it's in my dresser, but the money under the mattress is actually not a financially advisable thing to do, even though it appears to be. Yes,
There is
you
such
have
a
the
thing as
money.
compound interest, for
Right,
example.
exactly,
We do.
exactly.
Yeah, I know.
So
Um,
that sort of thing, that in
so true.
was implicitly reinforced, and I think that I do have a very hard time asking people to, pay for
Mm,
the services I offer. I think there are a combination of reasons why that's true. Partially because asking for money as a woman is, hard to do. We do a lot of unpaid labor, we do a lot of unpaid, work, and we're sort of expected to be volunteers. We make up the majority of, nonprofit work and volunteer work, and, the docents at your museum are always, retired women, and, philanthropy, and a lot of that work is expected to be done for free. And because my company is socially minded, it is, a lot of people do ask me if we're a nonprofit.
yeah.
Because the idea of women helping women has got to be a charitable cause, and I
Mm,
always say that no, like investing in women is or buying the work of women artists is impact investing. It's not charity. I mean, charity is a lot of things, and it's important, and philanthropy is necessary because there's so many gaps in our system. But in this case, I want a rising tide to lift all boats, and I want everyone to win,
mhm.
which includes less than half, and needs to be a sustainable business for it to be affirm the legitimacy of the idea. I think, if this is the system that runs our country, which it does, we need to be a part of it.
But we are coming towards the end of our podcast, and I just want to thank you so much for not only for your time and for all of the amazing information you shared, but really for the work that you are doing. Because if I can speak on behalf of all women artists, which I never do, but I am sure they would agree that this is service of the highest level that you're providing,
Thank
and
you.
I think that the world is definitely better off with your work and with your company, and I so much appreciate that. And I think as we move forward and keep bringing up all these voices from women and non-binary folks, I think the more we do this, the more people will appreciate it and value. And so thank you for doing all this amazing work.
Absolutely. I mean, it really is, it's on behalf of the artists, and it's on, um, It's for this greater spirit that exists that I believe so thoroughly in, which is that women's creativity is an essential piece of our culture, and we need to acknowledge it because it's what makes us human.
Long live the K women.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you all so much. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate you.
Really, really a great conversation.
This was great. And wait for me on the matronage because I'm joining.
Excellent. We would love
I
to have
can't
you.
wait to go into these visits. It's going to be so much fun.
Oh, good, good. Yeah, I think, yeah, as I said, there's just a really good energy and a really good, it's just bringing the right people together who want to do the right thing, and magic comes from that.
I'll join.
Yeah, wonderful.
Thanks for listening to Wealthy, the Matriarch podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, it would mean so much to me if you shared this with someone. Make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and head to matriarch.com to stay connected. I'm your host, Patricia Asui Reed. Thank you so much for being here.